Hi, everyone. We had a really great conversation with Ravi Sharma in our episode number 14. So, here are some reflections and some learnings from our chat with him. The first thing we spoke about with him, he was talking about his growing up years and his time at college doing engineering. And he talked about how he realized during his fourth year of engineering that ambition and ability both played very important and independent roles in developing your career. I think what he was talking about and what he meant by that was that one part is that you have the ability to get to somewhere, but what's important is a deliberate process of building ambition. And it's not simply a natural process of who you are and your ability to that leads you to where you want to get to. But to quote him, one can choose what one can do in life and not just flow to where you want to go to. Through his early time in his career, he also, very interestingly, and he was half joking about it, but he was obviously very serious, that he realized very quickly in his jobs that he can't handle having a boss. He enjoyed the independence of being able to work by himself and didn't really want a boss to be guiding him or showing him where to go and so on. And that in his career become a very important push factor for him to get into a second innings, an entrepreneurial career, and so on. And that is something that I'm sure you've seen a lot of as well, Suman, with people, that the freedom to do what you want to becomes a great push factor for people.
Yeah, and we did talk quite a bit about the push and pull. And so this was a clear push for him. He had this realization pretty early. He mentioned that I can't handle a boss. Okay.
Exactly.
Which I thought was a little interesting because a lot of us, when we're working, sometimes you like a boss, sometimes you don't like a boss. If you don't like a boss, you try to get a different boss or you try to change the company. But very seldom does it hit you saying, you know what, I just can't do with a boss. I need to be on my own. Right? And we also talk to the transition, and this is something we do with a lot of most of our guests, uh, the actual jump. So for him, it was a very deliberate jump, right? He mentioned it many times that it was not a spur of the moment kind of thing for him. So for him, it was a very deliberate process. He said, I did a lot of vigorous research. And he it seems like a very different line, but the training line was not that new to him because he had already done that similar work with Becton Dickinson extensively. So he
Yeah.
was getting into a
Yeah.
kind of not a completely unknown space, right? He kind of knew the place. And there, in fact, he mentioned that some other trainer said at one point, hey, really good at this. Why don't you do you want to do this full time? And then that's when he started thinking about it and then decided to go. So one was the push, and of course he said that the pull has to be very strong because that's what makes you make the jump. He said, Anshu's episode he heard, he said there seemed to be no push, but the pull was so strong it kind of pulled him away. So while
Mm.
both pull and push are important, the pull needs to be
Mm.
so strong that whether there is push or not, it kind of just takes you away from what you're doing and really make you do what you want to do.
That is true, and I think that's what made him do it as deliberately as you're saying, Suman. That he talked about this book, "What Color Is Your Parachute," and very deliberately he went about talking to different types of people that he knew in his ecosystem, people who were trainers, and kind of understood what consultants and trainers do in the space that they do, and then he decided to go about taking the plunge. What I really liked was, and I'm sure you remember the story. I strongly urge our listeners to go back and listen to the episode number 14, because Ravi talks about this story about when he was a young kid growing up in Meerut with his friends and his cousins, that they used to play on this mango tree, and they would jump from one tree to the other, and for that fleeting moment or moments in between the two would be a very high level of anxiety and a lack of clarity, and that feeling of you're neither here nor there. And he used that as a great analogy for taking the plunge into a second innings. And he also talked about how when you're at the original mango tree, so to speak, you have a sense of identity with being in a corporate, being who you are, being safe in that, secure in that, and then you decide to make that jump across to the other tree, and in between you feel the anxiety, and that's bound to happen when you're kind of between things. Now, before you find any kind of identity or even clarity, and you've landed on the new, a mango tree, so to speak. So I thought that was a very fascinating and interesting story he told us about. So he also talked about, and I guess that was the part of being his transition journey, that how important it is to have a partner. He had a partner, and unfortunately they were not able to make that work, and he had to go through the process, as he shares in the episode, about kind of unraveling that relationship, partnership relationship. So he was well planned in his process as advice for people, that you should be clear about what you expect from your partner before you start. Some clarity there is important.
It surely is good advice. Uh, Also, it's unique because a lot of the people we have spoken with either have been solo entrepreneurs or they've got a partner and they're still working with the partner. Now, here was a
That's
case
true.
where he started
That's
with a
true.
partner, so he felt the need for it, but for some reason it didn't work out, right? And I think some of the things he mentioned, he said, have a clear charter of the roles and responsibilities. He suggests make it dynamic. He's saying
Hmm.
keep rewriting it as you go along. It should not be a static document. It shouldn't happen that 2 years later you get into some trouble and then you're trying to search for the document, right? Make it dynamic, keep
Hmm.
changing it.
Yeah.
And he mentioned that if you don't do that, and sometimes a lot of startups don't do that, a lot of partnerships don't do that, thinking just let's get started and we'll sort it out later. So he says avoid that because it can be very, very painful when you have to do that
Hmm.
later if
Hmm.
you haven't
Hmm.
figured that out upfront, right? So have a clear charter, keep it dynamic, keep making changes. It will save you a lot of heartburn later. I thought that was good advice.
The advice that he was giving to people who are on the fence, he was very clear that you should play to your strengths, because there is a tendency to do things beyond your strengths, because obviously as an entrepreneur you end up doing almost everything. Piece of advice that he's learned the hard way is that one should learn to get out of your own way. You are not the best at everything, and it's best to have other people do things that you can't do. Maybe a partner, maybe people along with you for the journey or whatever. He also felt that this risk taking as a concept is highly romanticized and overrated. He felt that you can mitigate those risks to a large extent by exploring, by experimenting, testing your craft before you decide to do the whole, go the whole hog and jump into it. So that I thought was, and one or two other people have said the same thing to us, that it is possible to do side hustles and things like that before you decide to take the big plunge.
Yeah, and I think at some point he talked a bit about the economy, the fact that uh, where India is currently, it's poised to grow, multiply many times in the next 10, 15 years. And a lot of people will get into entrepreneurship. So as the per capita increases, we talked about the organized sector getting more organized because right now, as a percentage of the whole economy, it's relatively small. So he said that will
Yeah.
grow, and the only way that will grow is through entrepreneurship, not so much for big corporates. And he said that's been evidenced in other parts of the world as well. So I think he was saying this in terms of advice to young people, saying, "Hey, don't worry. There are a lot of people who will get into this. There'll be a lot of growth. So just go and take the plunge." I think that was his key message there.
And it was heartening to hear that, Suman, because just like everybody else, we love to hear good stuff about what we're doing, and he kind of connected that with our project, and saying that second innings is something that a lot more people will be looking at, and our platform could help a lot of people.